And this is my question. And this is a question, I suppose, that has a great deal to do with the meaning of freedom. What if the system cannot be fixed? What if the system cannot be fixed? What happens if we recognize that the history of the prison is precisely the history of attempts to fix the system? The history of the prison is the history of prison reform.
The very erudite Angela Davis there speaking at Keene State some years ago about prison abolition. Welcome to Burn It Down with Kim Brown, everybody. And from that clip, you should be able to ascertain what today's program is about. It's about abolition, specifically prison abolition. And we know the conversations have increased quite a bit over these past couple of years about abolishing the police and defunding the police. But that goes hand in hand with getting rid of jails. Jails do not equal justice. Abolition does. And I hope that you are going to sit down and take in this conversation / education about a complex and greatly misunderstood topic that people look at our criminal justice system and really can't imagine a world without jails, right? I mean, jails are as ingrained in our society as police are, unfortunately. But many thinkers, people who have experienced the carceral system, people who have studied it, know that there are alternatives to what we currently have. And especially in the age of this pandemic, where we're seeing jails be vectors for spreading coronavirus, not only to people who are incarcerated, but to many in the community as well. There has been a couple of states that have had explosions of the virus behind bars, and the people who are experiencing these conditions are getting no help, no sort of respite, no consideration for their humanity. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Listen, if you're watching us right now on the Real News Network's YouTube channel, when you get the chance, or look in the chat link, right? We're going to drop a link there for you to subscribe to Burn It Down with Kim Brown, the YouTube channel. We need to get those subscribers up, ladies and gentlemen. If we could get to over 1,000, I would be most appreciative. But without further delay, I want to begin our show, and I'm very excited to have the guest that we have today. It's going to be a fantastic educational piece of programming we are offering here. So first phase is one that you definitely know if you watch the Real News Network. We're joined today with Eddie Conway. Eddie's the executive producer and the host of Rattling the Bars. He is also the chairman of the board of Ida B's Restaurant and the author of 2 books, Martial's Law, The Life and Times of a Baltimore Black Panther, and The Greatest Threat, the Black Panther Party and Coil-to-Pro. And Eddie's joining us today from Baltimore. And we're also joined today with Lorenn Walker. Lorenn is the director of the Hawai'i Friends of Restorative Justice, and she's also an associate professor of practice at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Lorenn designs, implements, studies, and publishes on public health approaches, including restorative justice and solution-focused brief therapy in response to wrongdoing and social injustice. And as a juvenile, she personally experienced the criminal justice system. And as an adult, she has spent most of her career working to bring healing to the system. So I want to thank you both for making some time to join us here today on Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Kim.
Eddie, I want to start with you for people who may not be familiar with your story. If you wouldn't mind just sharing with us briefly what you experienced when you were incarcerated and why you know firmly in your heart and soul that abolition is truly the only way that we can move towards freedom and justice, true justice in this country, if we ever get there.
Well, the first day that I walked into the prison system, I was treated like an animal. I had been all around the world, across the country, and I had some experience with people in all different kinds of society. And then I stepped into the Maryland Penitentiary, and I was immediately, probably within 2 hours, reduced to an animal. And of course, I resisted that from that moment on. But that's the story of prisons. They destroy the humanity of human beings that walk in the door, no matter how flawed they are or whatever is wrong with them. The job of the guards is to dehumanize you and to make you think you're less than a whole person. And that's the only way they can control you. And then when you add the mix of putting urban prisoners of color in rural white communities, and have that clash between cultures, ideologies, attitudes, you end up with a lot of violence between the guards and the prisoners. The prisoners always lose. They set and swallow a lot of hostility. They suffer that abuse and pain in those rural jails, like Cumberland, Maryland, say, for instance, or Somerset or Hagerstown. And then 4 or 5 years later, when they are released, because almost 85% prisoners always return back. When they're released, they are hostile, they're angry, they're frustrated, and they have all of this aggression pent up in them. And they come back into the community and they release that on people in the community. And that's what's creating the violence that we see in urban centers and across the country. In so many cases, it's being manufactured in prisons. That's one, if there was no other reason whatsoever, that's one main reason there shouldn't be prisons as we see them today.
Lorenn, as Angela Davis said at the top of the show, the prison itself was designed to be a vehicle of reform for violent crime, but it in itself is a receptacle for violence. It creates violence. Why is it that prisons don't work or do the job of rehabilitation as we have been conditioned to understand them to be these places that we send quote unquote bad people so they learn their lesson, allegedly?
Well, I think it's because punishment doesn't work. We've punished everybody. Who in the whole world has never experienced punishment? Yet we have a totally violent world, right? I mean, there's all kinds of conflict and wrongdoing in every culture. Wherever there's violence, wherever there's really a lot of punishment, I think there's violence. Punishment it's especially physical punishment, corporal punishment, hurting people. That's the model of the prison system, is punishment. And it is, hurting people. It's like we think if we hurt someone, they're going to learn. And I'm sorry, I don't think it works. I don't know. I raised 3 kids. I was raised. I know a lot of people do use punishment, but I don't think it works. I think it teaches people to be violent. And I think prisons, another word I use is crime college. Prison is crime college. That's where you go to learn about crime. So yeah, I just don't think exclusive punishment model, and especially really brutal. Prisons are brutal. Like what Eddie was saying, they dehumanize people. They're brutal. You're a number, you're a number. It's pretty just totally dehumanizing. And yeah, they don't work. The prison doesn't work.
So, Eddie, as much as we understand as the prison system to be baked into American society, just like policing, capitalism is very much intertwined within the prison system. I mean, pretty much since its advent on this continent, in this country, where prisoners were used as labor on the chain gangs, doing labor for the state, or even doing labor for private people or private entities. That's a big reason why the prison industrial complex continues to go on as it does, because there's a lot of money involved with the incarceration of these Black and brown bodies and giving them literally slave wages to perform labor for multi-billion dollar corporations.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is important to note historically is when the Emancipation Proclamation took place, slavery was abolished. Of course, you had the 13th Amendment that made the exception for anybody convicted of a crime would still be held in slavery. But what should be noted is that penitentiaries, prisons sprung up all across the country when slavery was abolished. Prior to that, you had some penitentiaries, you had some poorhouses, jails, etc. But there was this massive boom of prisons at the end of slavery. And who end up in these prisons for not having jobs or not having money or not having papers or not having addresses was the wandering slaves and the wandering slave population. And so prisons is part of American society in such a way that American society would not be rich, for one thing, because of the amount of exploitation, first from slaveries, then from prison populations, road gangs, etc. That wealth, myself, my personal experience is I was a graphic art designer for about 15 years in the prison system. Graphic art designers were making $25 an hour. I worked for 8 hours a day. Technically, I should have made $200 a day. I was making $6. And I designed most of the stuff in BWI. I designed a lot of the highway stuff, welcome to American signs, welcome to Maryland signs, stop signs, traffic signs, every kind of thing you can imagine for $6. A person outside would have made $200 that day. At the end of that week, they would have made $1,000. And I barely made $30. So there is an economic incentive in locking up as many people as possible and exploiting them for their labor, because that other money is the money that the state and whoever's in charge of financing runs away with. So prisons is part of what makes America stand out in the world as being wealthy. The other part of it, obviously, is America's ability to go around the world and exploit other people, just like it's exploiting prisoners. At the time I was making $6 a day, half the population of the world was making $2 a day, under the control of 800 military bases around the world of Americas. So it's a integral part of capitalism. It's a domestic part of capitalism that exploits the world internationally. It exploits the population internally here.
You just blew my mind a couple times right there, Eddie. I mean, Lorenn, when we talk about prisons as this sort of economic engine that America has come to rely and depend on in a myriad of ways, from the fines levied and collected by the court system, the cash bail system, and then the actual construction and employment of prisons in general. Right? They oftentimes in these small communities, rural places, like Eddie mentioned, these are the job hubs. This is where rural America goes to earn a living, but it is contingent upon bodies being in those beds. Moreover, that more often than not, that are there unjustifiably, or they're based just on the color of their skin.
Yeah, I agree. That's true. That also it's economic. I've visited prisons all over the world, and I've noticed in all of the prisons, I can tell, even in the ones in Norway, and I've been to Halden prison in Norway, you can tell that people are poor. There's indication that they have had an impoverished life, whether it's they look a lot older than their years, or whatever. You can tell that they're people who are impoverished on the lower scale of whatever the socioeconomic ladder is in that country. I don't know if I just wanted to tell you about one prison I visited, though, that was remarkable. And Eddie, I hope you can find out about it. I can send you some information. It's called the APAC prison. It's a private prison this is incredible. It's in Brazil, and it is run by the people in prison. There is no guards. They are their own guards. And I spent the night at one of the prisons, the APAC. It stands for the Association of the Condemned Person. And it started in the early 1970s. There was a lawyer named Mario Ottoboni, and there were all these really extreme prison riots going on in Brazil, in Rio. And Mario was a Catholic, and he said he heard the voice of God tell him, Mario, you must do something about this prison problem. And so he was this young lawyer, and he started this whole prison model where the people who are sentenced to prison, they run it. They really run it. They have the keys. They do everything. It's faith-based, that they have an association with a church, and the church people come during the day, but at night it's just the people who are in prison, and it's like a school. It's like a school, I spent the night there, and my husband spent the night too. We both did, at the one in Itaúna in Minas Gerais. It's a state in the middle of Brazil, and it was really incredible. They had really good food. Everybody worked. That's kind of the model, is that everyone works and contributes, to the facility. And it really did seem like a school. It was, it was poor because the people build it themselves. So the communities build it, but it's totally different. And then when I was there too, they did have one section that had bars, and there were some guys in the cell. And I said, why are you in the cell today? And they said, we're just here for today because we're here in solidarity for our brothers who are in the other prisons in Brazil, because the other prisons are, typical.
That's fascinating, Lorenn. I've not heard that before. Eddie, have you ever heard about this prison that she's describing?
No, I haven't, and I would like to have some information on it. I have been down to Brazil, and I like the people and the stuff they're doing down there. So if you could, Lorenn, please send it to me.
Absolutely. I wrote an article about it, I've written about it, and then someone now who, because I've written about it, another, she's become my colleague and friend, Simeona. She is a Italian filmmaker, and she's making a documentary about it. And I can put you in touch with her too, because she's been there. And there's I think there's about 80 of them. And they tried it in the United States. It didn't really work because of our Constitution, because there is this faith-based element to it. But they're very open. There's one in Africa, I think in Nigeria, and it was Muslim. It was Islamic. The faith that they used was Islamic. So and I'll, I'm not a real faith-based person. You know what I mean? I'm not really, my work is not faith, it's public health based, my stuff. But I'm fine. I think it's fine to do with the way they do this prison. It's lovely. So the person comes in shackles you have to get special permission. The judge has to say, okay, you can go to the APAC prison. They come in, they have this beautiful ceremony where the person, they're in shackles that the guards bring them from the other jail. They come into this prison. It's like a school thing. And all the people in the APAC prison surround the new person and they undo the shackles and they say, you now are free to become the person that you're meant to be. And they also call the people, instead of like inmates, they call them the Portuguese, because they speak Portuguese. It's called recuperando, and it means person in rehabilitation, a rehabilitating person. And they have all levels of crime, from murder, to drugs and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll send you the information. Yeah, it's fascinating.
That's incredibly interesting, and you kind of bring me to another place before I kind of wanted to delve into the weeds of abolishing prisons. I mean, do we need to abolish all prisons, or does America just get the prison system wrong? Eddie, let me ask you that question first.
Well, I think the answer to that is probably all prisons. But it's the way in which we look at how it's done. I don't think America gets it wrong. I think everybody around the world that's dealing with prisons, for the most part, get it wrong. Even those prisons in Norway, even though they're very lenient, of course, the populations are almost completely white, they still get it wrong. I think what we need to look at is what sends people to prisons. In America, say, for instance, the United States of America, that is, 80% of the people in the prison system is drug related. It's about either acquiring drugs, possessing drugs, distributing drugs, retaliating about drug activities, etc. 80%. If you decriminalize drugs, you don't have to legalize them, but decriminalize them and treat them as a health issue, you would wipe out almost 2 million people that's in prison right now. It would just release those people. And of course, you can't do that without some kind of program, education, and so on. But the thing of it is, if you decriminalize that, that will stop that massive pouring into a system that doesn't work, and that further end up victimizing, criminalizing, and destroying people would disappear. That's one thing. The other thing is that you find that a lot of the population, that upper 20% or so on, a lot of it is some sort of domestic violence or interaction around stress and strain about money. They have, in fact, an idea, and it's been turned down in a couple places, to give people a yearly living wage, to make available to anybody that don't have it, make that available. People are breaking laws to get tennis shoes or to get this or to get that. And if they're not getting that kind of stuff, they're frustrated. If they can't pay their bills, or if they got to have a choice between eating and getting medicine and feeding their children, there's going to be laws broken. That can be fixed. You can decriminalize the drugs. You can give people a living wage. Then after that, you can then work on that percentage of population that need to have treatment, that need to be interacted with around how to deal with violence, how to deal with crises, how to deal with that kind of stuff. But if you get rid of the bulk of the prison system automatically by changing those two things, the drug laws and the living wage, and then you have a small population that's going to need therapy, that's going to need re-education, that's going to need treatment, then you can focus and put that money and interest there. So yeah, everybody's getting it wrong. And of course, it's going to take a minute to get it right. But as long as we know what we need to do to get it right, we can start along that path. It's like Loren's doing the program, that peer by peer thing in the prison system. It works. You'd be surprised how many prisoners in prison want to help each other. And it's just not available. They just don't make it available. And if people try to make it available, then those people are criminalized.
Well, when we talk about, as you mentioned, Eddie, reducing the number of people who are in prisons by ameliorating our horrible drug policies here in this country, I mean, the war on drugs never really ended, especially, if we look around in different states that have legalized marijuana, oftentimes people of color and Black people are excluded from that legal industry and are still facing criminal penalties, even in places where marijuana is legal. And we always want to shout out the state of Oregon for their recent ballot measure this past election day, decriminalizing small amounts of all drugs, which I think is just amazing. But Lorenn, when we sort of circle back to what Eddie's point about when you subtract the drug offenders, when you subtract people who are there because poverty is criminalized, doing petty crimes like either, shoplifting or even things like sex work, survival behaviors that people end up being in jail for, we're left with people who commit violent crimes. And that is sort of the overwhelming question people have when asking about what does abolish prisons even look like? What do you do with the rapers? What do you do with the child molesters? What do you do with the murderers? What do you do with those people if prisons are abolished? There are alternatives to dealing with people who act out in society in these ways.
Well, I think anyone who seriously, who abuses children, who rapes people, this kind of violence, I think it shows they have a mental health problem. They're ill. They are not well. People who do even mass shootings and whatever, they're sick. That's not healthy. That's not normal, healthy behavior. Just because you don't like what someone does, you don't go shoot them all up. So what I would do is I would have like some kind of model, like a hospital. I think there's only about, I think about maybe 15, I'm not even sure if it's 15% of the people in prison are dangerous. You know what I mean? Like, quote, whatever who have done, but there are some people who need to be isolated, right? So I say, create like some kind of a hospital more model, or like that APAC place I told you about, the APAC prison, where it's like a school, you can learn, and you give people maybe people who have been super violent like that, they're not going to be able to police themselves, I don't know. But, and it's kind of like defund the police, abolition. We're not saying like right now we're going to go open the doors to all the prisons and everybody just run out. It has to be, like defund the police, a slow process where you just divert some of the funding. My state of Hawaii, we have a population of about 1,300,000 or so. Our prison population is right now about 4,500 people, I think. And we spend $230 million a year on incarceration. 230 million. We could do so much money with that for those 4,000 something people who are the same people that keep coming in mostly. It's the revolving door. They're the same. It's recidivists. They haven't learned how to desist from crime. They haven't found. And that's another thing, the whole area of criminal desistance. And Eddie, I don't know if you're familiar, if you've studied it, but my friend Shad Maruna does a lot of this work, and he's in Ireland. He's an American expat that lives in Ireland, in Belfast, and it's like desistance. How do you desist from crime? What are the variables? And we know two of the most important variables are relationship with somebody who is law abiding. And then the other one is exactly what we're talking about, Eddie. It's having meaningful employment, meaningful work, something that you find meaning, work that sustains you. So we can do a lot of stuff, but I think you're right that the people who run these giant people, people are judged in business and stuff by how many people do they boss around, how many people work for me. So when I talk to you about my company, well, I've got a staff of 1,500, and you could say I have a staff of 3,000. I'm going to be like, oh man, I'm I'm lower, in the cast of employer. So, there's this value of how many people you boss around, what your budget is. We got to change that. I really think we have to care about what happens in these institutions. Prisons criminalize people. If we want our society and our community safe, we have to stop just being brutal to people who, like Eddie said, a lot of them just have substance abuse problems. They're people who are trying to medicate themselves because they don't feel good. In criminology, there's a concept. It's called the victim-offender overlap. That means that basically, and this is also in the literature, they are the same people. The victims and offenders are the same people. So, that's why we need to focus on healing. We have to have healing. We have to look at how people have been hurt and what we can do to repair the harm.
So one aspect about prisons and incarceration I wanted to touch on with the both of you has to do with juveniles. And, during the height of the 90s, when I was coming up in my formidable years, teenagers were getting locked away, charged as adults, hit with, major time for a variety of things. In addition to the fact that over the past 20 or so years, there's been this rise of having police in schools in the form of school resource officers, criminalizing relatively, juvenile behavior. Kids get in fights, okay? I don't think that high schoolers should be charged with assault if they get into a fight. Kids do stupid stuff and bring weed to school. I don't think they should go to jail for that. But we've seen this escalation of criminalizing our children, Eddie. And what are the detrimental effects of putting young minds, teenagers, into the prison system and expecting them to come out better?
Well, first, and I'm sure the United States is probably the main offender of this, but according to the United Nations Charter, you're supposed to recognize that juveniles, their brain is still developing. Their brain is developing. And what we see as rebellious behavior is really a conflict of the synapses being rewired in the brain from adolescent to adulthood. And that takes place during those juvenile years up until about 24 or 25. So they don't necessarily think all the time as adults, or they don't necessarily think all the time as juveniles. But there's that constant conflict back and forth. One day or 1 minute, they're juvenile. The next minute, they're adults, etc. And so they make decisions based on that conflict. And the United Nations scientists, doctors, everybody recognizes that they're not fully developed. So the United Nations basically said that you don't lock a child up for the rest of their life. And that's the nations, 190-some nations decided that was the right thing to do. You give them juvenile life, that means they get out at 21 or 22. And they're put in a setting that's conducive to juvenile, even though in America they haven't got it right, and it's not going to get right because of the way the guards and the way that the corporal mind thinks in terms of abuse and punishment and so on. But the juvenile has to have that opportunity to get returned back to society. And it's against the law, international law that is, to give a juvenile life or a death sentence. So it's all wrong here. And I think the only way you can even start even looking at juveniles is what Lorenn is saying, is restorative justice. Because and what's really not funny, because actually it's a tragedy, because for Black and brown communities, there is no such thing as restorative justice. In white communities, especially middle class, upper middle class, etc., there's all kinds of restorative justice. You know, they never go to jail. Young people never, they get brought home by officer friendly. In the Black community, they get killed by officer stormtrooper. But the restorative justice works in part of America, and we see it all the time. I'm bringing him home, he did something wrong, you got to talk to him, or you got to talk to her, or I caught them, so on, so and so. And they get a tap on the hand, and they get turned over to their parents, and they go about their business. And it was a close call. In the communities of color and poor white communities also, young people don't necessarily get that opportunity. They end up in jail, and the damage is done there because they end up in adult jails, and they end up in predatory situations, and they have to either fight or be abused. And from that point on, they are on the pathway to become career criminals. And that's happening by that first encounter, those first initial encounters. And in our community, when I was growing up centuries ago, young people were being locked up at 10 and 11 and 12. And they were coming out of prison, you know, with all like, I've been there, I've been to the Cheltenham, I've been to there, I've been here, you know, that's right, I'm all that now. And it became a badge of honor. And that's really where it goes off track at right there. Because from that point on, you're dealing with somebody that didn't see themselves as being tough. And they see their interaction with other people in their community as violent. And that's how they end up. And before you know it, it's like, oh, you're that little bad guy. You're back here again. Okay, give him 10 years this time. And you got a person that's going to end up in prison for the rest of their life. But it starts right there, 10 years old, 11 years old, especially in, like I say, poor white communities and communities of color. We're put in that pipeline and then we're stuck. And there's millions that's still suffering the consequences. They've been through the jail system and that are out, they can't vote, they can't function, they can't understand how to take care of themselves. Millions, because the prison system is like a factory. And it's just constantly, here in Maryland, 1,000 people go in every year. 1,000 people come out every year. And that's 1,000 damaged souls. Maybe 200 of them might be able to save their stuff. 800 of them are destroyed. Every year, it's a mill. It's a factory. And that's happening in Maryland. It's happening in every state. And so imagine how many people have been damaged that's out there that we don't even count as statistics anymore. It's tens, if not hundreds of millions over these last 400 years or so. But anyway, enough of that.
No, I mean, no, you making an amazing point. And, to that point, Lorenn, how you and I are acquainted is because I reached out to you about 3 years ago, well, maybe about 2 years ago now, because my younger brother, William Michael Brown, was murdered in 2017 by a 16-year-old in a very random, violent encounter that it devastated so many people who knew my brother. But the circumstances I felt were also very devastating because of the age of the boy who killed him. I want us to look at this video just to give y'all a quick snapshot of what the case involving my brother's killer had to do with. I believe the Star Advisor advertiser part of me, the paper there in Hawaii did a small video. If we could look at that, Dwayne, please.
On the night, or the morning that my son was killed, he and his friends were together when they were attacked by 15 juveniles, with Mr. Torres being one of them. 2 were females. The female that was with my son that night was beaten. She got stitches. She received stitches, bruises, and they also stole her purse.
For the mother, I want the mother to have justice what she wants. I just want the family to get what they want. More support for the mother in the Market Center right now. And Sergeant Brown had a big impact on my life. He always made me laugh when I was always down. Gave me good advice when I needed it.
I got to Hawaii in 2015, and from 2015 till the day he died in 2017, we worked together in the same platoon. He was my squad leader for a little bit, and then we worked alongside of each other up until our last field up. He's just a great person to be around. He's always making people laugh, and people just really enjoyed being around him because he's just a good person.
So the person you saw there, Nicholas Torres, who was convicted of manslaughter for the murder of my brother Mike. He was 16 at the time this act was committed. And Lorenn, you know, I submitted a victim impact statement during his sentencing hearing that the court played, and I was appreciative that the court played it. And as devastating of a thing, as heinous of an act as he did, as, you know, killing my brother on the street, I did not feel that this young man should be looking at 20 years or life in jail. At 16, there had to be some sort of misfunction of his brain, like something like kind of alluding to your point. He had a health issue. He had some sort of mental health problem that caused him to act out in a violent way. And when he was sentenced to 20 years, you know, I wasn't really sure how I felt about that, because that tells me he's going to do hard time in the penitentiary for 20 years. And I don't know what that does to a 16-year-old boy. I know what he did. What he did was horrible, but he's going to come out one day, and he needs to come out better and not worse. And he was already going to jail as a killer. So that's how I reached out to you, because I was sort of looking for some guidance about this. Like, what can I say? Is there anything I can do? And then to kind of feel the weird part, like, you know, well, I'm the victim here. Like, he murdered my brother. He committed something heinous against my family. Why would I have any empathy for this child or what happens to him? Or, you know, we should lock him up or throw away the key or whatever. How do people deal with that? How have you dealt with that also? You know, people who are victims of crime, but not necessarily having faith that the criminal justice system is going to provide either A, justice, or B, any sort of rehabilitation in an earnest way for the person who committed the violent crime.
Well, like I've told you before, you have a lot of wisdom, and you use a lot of self-insight, you know, about your feelings. You notice you have this ambivalence about him, you know, this ambiguity. You want him, you know, he killed your brother, but on the other hand, he is a human being. So you've got a lot of self-insight, and which is totally awesome, which a lot of people don't have. But I think, and I think it has to do with that whole cognition, you know, being able to think about things. And like what Eddie was saying, how kids don't have full functioning yet. And when I was in public health school, we learned you didn't finish adolescence in the U.S. till you were 26. So, you know, that's a long time. And one of the things, too, we know in the literature and the research of juveniles is that who goes into the adult system? a lot of kids who had problems and were in the juvenile system go into the adult system. Who goes into the juvenile system? Kids who have alcohol and substance abuse problems. They take drugs and alcohol. They have substance abuse problems. Who are the children that use drugs and alcohol? Children who have learning problems. Learning problems. They don't know how to read. They don't know how to have that higher scale cognitive functioning where, like you can use yourself insight. You can process what's going on. People who don't have that yet don't do that. So we need to design systems to give people those opportunities. We need education. We need to teach people how to think. I'm appalled. 70 million people just voted for the guy at the White House right now. To me, it seems like we have a education problem in the United States. Clearly, and really, if people can't. Who can say there's no racism and stuff? Do you not read about like Great Migration or know about the Trail of Tears and all these like racist things in Hawaii? The Americans had a coup against the Native Hawaiians and stole this land. It was by coup with guns, with rifles. They put the queen in her. They locked her up. What I really think we need for everyone is truth and reconciliation. And so that's why I'm a real supporter of Fania Davis's, Angela Davis's little sister. Her sister's work, Fania Davis, has written a lot about it and studied it. And I totally agree with her. We need truth and reconciliation in the United States. And then, better education. Put more money into education instead of all the military and prisons and in my state, we spend way more per person in prison than we do for a child in public school. It's like, 10 times as much or something.
Well, it's so interesting that you raise that, Lorenn, because, during that process when, Nicholas Torres was arrested and going through, initially he pled not guilty, but then he took a plea deal. I have been in contact with the prosecutor there in Honolulu and had a number of conversations with him. And I found him as an individual to be responsive to me as the family of the victim. But at the same time, I was really troubled by some of the language that the prosecutor, and I spoke with one of the police detectives who had been tasked with investigating my brother's killing, his murder. The language that they used about Nicholas Torres, I was like, well, what do you know about him? Oh, he's a bad kid. He comes from a bad part of town. His parents don't do this, do that. And I'm like, you're kind of making a case for him to me. You don't even realize that you're making me have more empathy for him, but you're trying to like smear him by telling me what a bad person he is and how badly he was raised. Well, to me, that sounds like justification as to possibly why he did what he did, because he was fucked up, right? Pardon my language. But Eddie, we have this bloodlust in our country. And for people who are the family of victims, such as myself, it's sort of sold to us like, don't you want justice? And I'm like, I don't know that this is justice. This does not necessarily look like justice to me. How can we deprogram ourselves from this thinking that jail does equal justice for victims?
Well, I think we have to recognize that fear is the thing that is used to control populations, always have been, and it's spread throughout the community by mass media. So we need to go back and look at what's actually organizing and socializing our activities. And what we'll see is that 85% of the main media is controlled by 6 multinational corporations. So right away, there's 6 multinational corporations controlling most of the information we receive. And of course, the main line, whether it's through television, the internet, or print, is if it bleeds, it leads. So we're always bombarded with stories of violence, of stories that give us fear. And we don't go and look at the positive. We don't go and see the 95% of stories that would give us hope and put us in another direction. So first we have to question who's controlling our way that we think. And once we make that determination that it's this mass media thing that's happening to us, then we can see, like Lorenn was pointing out, 70 million people voting for Trump. They didn't vote for Trump because they're out and out racist, but they did vote for Trump because they feel that their way of life is coming to the end. They can no longer continue to exploit people around the world. They understand that the world population now it always has been the majority of people on the planet are people of color. The capitalist system, even though it's been spread throughout the planet, is mainly controlled by a small group of people that's hiding behind what I call white supremacy. They're using white supremacy to justify exploiting everybody around the rest of the world because you can discover America because there's no white people there, even though there's tens of millions of brown or red people. You can imprison Africa because there's no white people there, even though there's hundreds of millions of people. So this white supremacy is being promoted, and it's being promoted as you have to come together and rally around Trump because it's being threatened now. You are under threat. And that's what initially made white women vote for Trump. And that's what's made 70 million people. That 70 million don't represent everybody that's thinking like Trump. That just represents the people that came out and vote. There's probably a ton of more people back there in the background that think that way. That's either too young to vote, too old to vote, or don't give a shit. But that's the media. The media is creating that. And until we can change that, until we can create alternative press, social media outlets, where we can do a better job of putting and promoting the truth and stories and things that people can see as positive, and they won't live in fear. Because when you take all of this away, fear is at the bottom of it. And fear is like, damn, we need to do something about this. Well, every person that you lock up and throw away the key, there's 10 people back there in the background that's suffering those same conditions that ultimately will become that person that you're going to have to lock up in the future. And so we need to take that fear away. And then if we can take that fear away, then we can determine how to work with people. Just say, for instance, like in the Black community, you have a segment of our population that won't go down to the street corner because those young people down there are dangerous. No, they're your sons, your daughters, your sisters, your brothers, your cousins. They're not dangerous. They're dangerous if you ignore them, you don't talk to them, you don't interact with them, you don't see them as part of the community. They then don't see you as part of their community. And so there's a breakdown. And that breakdown is around what? Fear. What's going to happen if I go down there? So that's where we need to start at. And then if we can get beyond the fear, then we can treat the people that need to be treated. And we can deal with the people that need to be dealt with. And we can communicate.
And gang, we are running a little low here on time, and I wanted to piggyback off Eddie's point, Lorenn. It's okay, Eddie. No, you're fine. You're sharing your wisdom with us, man. We got time for that, Eddie. Don't worry. But getting back to Eddie's point, Lorenn, the fear, right? So there's a lot of fear around the opposition and the pushbacks to abolish the police and defund the police, and that fear also extends to abolishing prisons. In your travels, in your studies, I guess domestically, I mean, thank you for sharing that wonderful story about the prison in Brazil. But here in the States, or even in Canada, I mean, are there steps being genuinely made in earnest for prison reform, as much as the institution can be reformed for the positive? Anything that you have seen that gives you encouragement, and if you haven't seen it, does that discourage you along those same lines?
No, I think that there is. I think people, like, I was just a member of a study group here in Hawaii. Mostly, I think the people are on Oahu, my island I live on, and they're studying. The whole focus was abolition, and I first heard of the word prison abolition about maybe, I don't know, long over a decade ago from someone at the Vera Institute in New York. So I think that there is people are interested in this, but I think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be from the up, from the top down, they're going to change it. I think it's going to be the community, it's going to have to be from the community wanting to change it. And I totally agree too with Dwayne about the fear thing, that they've done studies on people who vote conservative versus liberal, and people who do vote conservative did have a high need for security, for safety, and the people who were voting more on the Democratic side were more open. And so I think they had less fear, and I'm not sure what that's from, but I think education does help you see other people. And restorative justice, though, having those conversations, Kim, like if you ever were able to talk to that Nicholas Torres, I think you would have, an opportunity to really heal, more. You're always going to have a scar, right? From a hurt, you're always going to have a whole wound, but you could have some more healing, if you ever had that opportunity to have that one-to-one conversation, which someday I hope you can have.
And I have to tell you, Lorenn, I mean, to be honest, that is a conversation I would be interested in having. The person I'd be more interested in speaking with would actually be Nicholas Torres's mom. And just a FYI, I mean, I was trying to locate these people in Honolulu, but because he was a juvenile at the time that all of this happened, the information about him was extremely limited. So I never got a chance to speak with him, even though that is something I would be open to doing. But I really would like to speak to his mother, because I know she was present during all the court proceedings. And I mean, she was absolutely devastated by what her son did, and the fact that he's going to spend at least 20 years or more possibly of his life in jail. But thank you for that sentiment. But y'all, we have run out of time. This has been such a enlightening and educational conversation that I certainly appreciate the both of you making time to speak with me here about on this program. I'd like to thank Eddie Conway. He's an executive producer here at the Real News Network. He's also an accomplished author and host of the program Rattling the Bars. And Lorenn Walker is the director of Hawaii Friends of Restorative Justice, also an associate professor of practice at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Thank you both for making the time to be here with me to talk about this extremely powerful topic that hopefully we can continue the conversations going. I love the fact that this is all starting to bubble up like in the mainstream, right? This is not just a dialogue that's being held in radical spaces. More people are beginning to understand this language and these concepts. So the more conversations we can have around it, we can bring more people to our side. So thank you both for your time today. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me too, and all your good work, Eddie and Kim. Thanks, and Dwayne. Thank you. Aloha. Aloha.
Aloha to you too. And it's gorgeous in Hawaii today, everybody. Lorenn was nice not to show us her background, because it's going to make the rest of us here on the East Coast extremely sad. I wanted to read some comments from the comments, if I could. Thank you very much to our producer, Jean-Pierre Montanar, who has been manning the chat. Paul X BSOG Friend of the show, Paul says, this interview has touched my heart. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you checking us out. Also, from the comments, we have Red Sea Socialist. Yes, media is a culprit in all of this nonsense. Absolutely, man. How many cop shows do y'all watch on a nightly basis? I mean, I'm guilty. I'm a SVU kind of chick, and then I get mad at myself like I am fully absorbing all this cop propaganda. I need to turn this shit off. John Custer says, thank you all. Great discussion. Hey, y'all, we appreciate y'all taking the time to check us out. Do we have any more? One more. Hold on. Poop. I can't read it. Yes, I can. Here we go. Afra. Thank you, Afra. Afra sings. Afra says, it's all about the money, profiting off of bodies, mostly Black and brown bodies. 100% correct. That's why the jails is going to keep going. That's why the police is going to keep trying to lock people up for weed where it's legal, because somebody got a fine to pay because the state need that bread. Hey, gang, that's our show for today. It is up in the air whether or not I'm going to have a program for you on Wednesday, but definitely continue to watch this space. Oh, did I say Wednesday? I meant to say Friday because, it's a Thanksgiving holiday. Remember your indigenous brothers and sisters during this time because it's not a happy memorial holiday for all. But we'll let you know if we have something to show you on Friday. Don't forget to go over to the Burn It Down with Kim Brown YouTube channel and subscribe there. I need to get up to 1,000 subscribers. So the faster y'all can help me get there, sister, show would appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a great holiday. But for God's sakes, don't travel. The COVID is out there and it's going to jump on you if you go to the airport. So try not to go nowhere. Wear your mask. Wash your hands, social distance. Do not get your grandparents sick. I will fuck you up. I mean that. All right, y'all have a good one. See you later. Thank you. Bye.